He was one of the most powerful, and let's be honest, one of the most feared men of the Third Reich. He was the absolute master of the SS, the head of the Gestapo, and the chief organizer of the Holocaust. Today, we're talking about Heinrich Himmler.
But here's the thing about Himmler's story. It's just filled with this terrifying paradox. And that brings us to the big question for this whole explainer. How on earth did this happen? How does a timid, sickly boy grow up to become the architect of industrial-scale genocide?
To even start to find an answer, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, back to a childhood that really showed almost no signs of the monster he was going to become.
I mean, the contrast here is just staggering. On one hand, you have the young Himmler, shy, did well in school, but was plagued by chronic health problems. And on the other hand, the Reichsfuhrer, the cold, calculating manager of mass murder. The journey from one to the other? Well, that's what we're here to unpack.
So Himmler was born in 1900. Pretty conventional middle-class family. He was a good student, but physically, he was weak. He struggled with his health, had terrible eyesight, and he kept this incredibly detailed diary, which gives us a pretty unsettling window into his early mind. But, the one thing that really defined his youth was this deep frustration. He was desperate for military glory in World War I, but the war ended before he ever got to see the front lines.
And that disappointment, that was a huge turning point. His military dreams were completely shattered, so he started looking for a new sense of power, a new place to belong. And he found it in the extremist politics bubbling up in post-war Germany. He fell in with these racist, nationalist student groups where hateful ideologies offered really simple answers and a target for that void left by his failed ambitions. And this radical path would lead him right into the heart of the Nazi Party, where he would build his very own empire, an empire founded on terror and absolute loyalty.
Now, get this. When Himmler was put in charge of the SS in 1929, it was nothing. A tiny, pretty insignificant group of just 280 men. They were basically just Hitler's personal bodyguards, hardly a force to be reckoned with. But this is exactly where Himmler's meticulous, almost obsessive bureaucratic nature just thrived. In only 4 years, he completely transformed the SS. By the time Hitler seized power, its ranks had exploded to over 52,000. He had created this elite, fanatically loyal order based on these really strict racial ideas, and he turned it into a state within a state.
But his rise wasn't just about good recruiting, oh no. In 1934, he was a key player in the Night of the Long Knives, this absolutely brutal purge of his rivals inside the party. And what was his reward for that bloody work? Total control over the secret state police, the Gestapo, and the entire network of concentration camps. So, with all these instruments of terror now firmly in his grasp, Himmler was ready to become the man history would forever remember him as, the chief architect of the final solution. Himmler's approach to genocide was just so methodical. You have to see it as a bureaucratic process. Step 1, isolate the victims, force them into ghettos. Step 2, deploy mobile killing squads, the Einsatzgruppen, to carry out mass shootings behind the front lines. And finally, when even that proved to be too inefficient, he oversaw the creation of permanent extermination camps, literal factories of death.
This chilling detachment is just perfectly captured by this one event. He's visiting the Eastern Front, and he insists on watching a mass execution. But when when it splattered onto his coat, he almost fainted. His big takeaway from that wasn't horror at the killing. It was concern for the psychological toll it was taking on his SS men. So his solution? A more civilized, more impersonal method of killing, gas chambers.
And did he feel any remorse? Not a shred. In the secret speech he gave to SS leaders in 1943, he talked about the extermination of the Jewish people not as a crime, but as a glorious page in our history. He actually framed mass murder as a difficult but necessary duty. It just shows how deeply he believed his own twisted ideology.
But his ideology, it wasn't just political. It was this bizarre, disturbing mix of racism, occultism, and pseudo-history that he actually tried to make the official religion of the SS.
Okay, so this is where the story gets even stranger. Himmler was obsessed with the occult. He genuinely believed he was the reincarnation of some medieval German king. He funded expeditions to Tibet to find the lost city of Atlantis. He even refashioned a castle to be a sort of Camelot for his SS knights, where he hoped he'd one day keep the Holy Grail. It's wild. And this, right here, might be the most terrifying part of all.
The guy lived a completely divided life. He was a man who started a chicken farm, who would affectionately call his daughter on the phone after spending a day inspecting a death camp. He'd get a massage and eat a good meal right before or right after witnessing an execution. For him, the monstrous and the mundane, they just existed side by side, on the same level. It was all just part of his daily routine.
But as the war finally turned against Germany, Himmler's empire of terror and his own warped sense of reality began to crumble all around him. And his downfall was fast. He got appointed as a military commander, proved to be totally incompetent, and got replaced almost immediately. Then, in this desperate attempt to save his own skin, the faithful Heinrich tried to secretly cut a peace deal with the Allies behind Hitler's back. When Hitler found out, he was furious. He stripped Himmler of all his titles and ordered his arrest. Just a few weeks later, Germany surrendered and Himmler was captured.
And his end was just pathetic. He was on the run, trying to disguise himself with a shaved mustache and an eye patch. But he got caught at a British checkpoint. You know why? Because his forged documents looked suspiciously new. And before he could be put on trial for his crimes, he bit down on a cyanide capsule he'd hidden in his mouth. He was dead in minutes.
So, Heinrich Himmler escaped justice. But his legacy? That's written in the unimaginable numbers of his victims and the vast system of death that he created. Under his command, the SS orchestrated the murder of nearly 6 million Jews. It's a number so huge it's almost impossible to really comprehend, but it represents the scale of his personal responsibility. And this murder was carried out across this enormous continent-spanning network. A recent study actually identified around 40,000 different sites of persecution, from the huge extermination camps to thousands of smaller forced labor sites. This was the physical map of Himmler's vision.
And so, in the end, we come right back to this terrifying normalization of evil. He saw no contradiction between being a loving father and a mass murderer. Like one analysis says, it was all just part of his day, all on the same level, all normal.
And this leaves us with one last really vital question. Himmler's story isn't just about one monstrous man. It is a profound warning. It forces us to ask, how does the ordinary, everyday work of organization, of scheduling, of paperwork become a weapon when it's put in the service of a hateful ideology? And more importantly, how do we make sure it never, ever happens again?